So, I'd like to welcome you to the Cape Blanco Light Station. This is a very unique lighthouse in many ways, but I guess the first question before we even talk about the lighthouse is, why would you need a lighthouse? What's it good for? Well, the answer is, as you look at the nautical chart, anything that's out there in blue is a place you don't want to be. There's submerged reefs up to 8.5 miles out to sea. When ship meets submerged reef, guess who loses? It's a guarantee every single time. So when we have a lighthouse like this that is up on a cliff, it's all about stay away, danger, as opposed to the ones that are down, say, the mouth of the Coquille River in Bandon that are welcome in. The mariners all had a book that showed each lighthouse and their own distinguishing feature. Our light flashes every 20 seconds. The mariners know that it's Cape Blanco and know that they don't want to get too close. This lighthouse has 5 very unique things. First of all, we are the highest above sea level of any lighthouse in Oregon. Our focal plane is 250 feet. That means the beam from this light can be seen up to 26 miles out to sea. We are the oldest continuously operating lighthouse in Oregon. Our lamp was first lit December 20, 1870, and has been in service ever since. As you look at some of these pictures over here, they will say that we are at the westernmost point in the United States. Well, that was absolutely true. However, the state of Washington kind of snuck in about 30 years later. They've got a couple of places that if we look at the map over here that are actually just a hair farther west. Here at Cape Avila and Cape Flattery, if you drop straight down, you can see they might be just a tiny hair farther. Now, this would be accurate if the Earth was flat. A map like this only shows what would we like if the Earth was flat. We know that can't be true because if the Earth was flat, the cats would have knocked everything off by now. So, as a native Oregonian, I wasn't really willing to give up my bragging rights. If we go here from Cape Blanco all the way over to England to the prime meridian, and from Cape Avila all the way to England to the prime meridian, because of that curvature of the Earth, we're actually 614 miles farther west from the prime meridian than they are. So take that, state of Washington. Being a lighthouse keeper was a man's job. Women were not allowed at any time to be lighthouse keepers, which was kind of silly because most lighthouses were, keepers were married. That allowed them to have their wives working along with them. In 1904, the lighthouse keeper up in Coquille died of tuberculosis, left behind a widow and 3 small children. The Lighthouse Commission was not willing just to turf him. She didn't want to just go do something else, so they changed the rules. She was allowed to come down here as a lighthouse keeper, and as near as I've been able to research, that's the very first time a woman has been allowed to take a man's job in any federal agency. Pretty progressive for 1904. We had the longest serving lighthouse keeper of any lighthouse on the entire Pacific coast. This picture here is of James and Elizabeth Langlis. They came here in 1876 as an assistant. 6 years later, he was promoted to head keeper. Kept that job till his retirement in 1919. They came out here with 1 child. They had 5 more. Could you imagine raising 5 children out here on this rock? No TV, no electricity, no running water. Nearest neighbors 3 miles away. Ooh, if you needed to go to Port Orford, it was saddle up, go down the cliff, low tide, ride up the beach to Port Orford, wait for the next low tide, ride back up the beach, up the hill. It was a very isolated place. The Lighthouse Commission provided housing, and this first house was built in 1870 along with the lighthouse. It was a duplex. On this side, the far side, was the head keeper's quarters, where the keeper and his family lived. On this side, it was all about the assistant keeper and his family, and the second assistant and his family. There was 1 kitchen and 1 dining room on this side. Now, the old Chinese symbol for trouble, two women under one roof. Yeah, we don't know how the ladies got along. We know the men didn't. There was one case that we have recorded. There was an argument over who was going to have control over one of the rooms. It descended into fisticuffs. And from fisticuffs, they couldn't quite settle it. So they went outside. One of them picked up a board, bashed the other in the head hard enough, they had to take him to Port Orford for medical care. There was also a case where the keepers, company assistant keepers were up in the lantern room. They got into a fist fight and caused damage up there even. So I can see how people might get kind of owly. The weather today, calm, but definitely not clear. Many days we can't even see the lighthouse from here. The wind is a constant factor. On a day like this, not much wind. When it gets to 50 miles an hour, we have to close the lighthouse and the visitor center. We closed 5 days in May, and just one day last week. The highest winds recorded here were during the Columbus Day storm of 1962, where the highest winds were 150 miles an hour, but that broke the top off the anerometer. They estimate the winds made it to 180 miles an hour. The winds were so severe, it was picking up fist-sized rocks from the beach, throwing them up the 200-foot cliff, across the 800-foot flat, and impacted the lighthouse. It actually broke some of the windows in the lantern room. My older brother talked with the chief petty officer who was on duty here at the time. He said, those rocks hitting the lighthouse sounded like heavy caliber rifle fire. Not a good place to be. The lighthouse keepers also had to do things like provide all of their own wood. It took between 30 and 40 cords of wood a year to keep this light station going. Now, if we were to fast forward to World War II, there was a great fear of Japanese invasion. It was a well-founded fear. You can see here they brought in many additional buildings, including a Loran station, a 300-foot radio tower, a 150-foot watchtower. They were on the lookout for Japanese submarines. It was a good thing they were on the lookout because the Japanese had a class of submarine, and I'll show you a picture of it here, that had a watertight compartment just in front of the sail that contained a seaplane. In September of 1943, they surfaced just 10 miles out to sea from here, rolled the seaplane out, assembled the wings, fired it off the catapult shot. It came in over the lighthouse, went down to Brookings, dropped 2 incendiary bombs. It was up in the forest. It had rained heavily the 2 weeks before, so they didn't get a whole lot of fires started. But their goal was to start major forest fires and pull resources away from the war effort. It didn't work very well. It was soggy, so the fires were quickly extinguished. The plane came back up here, went back out to sea, was recovered, and sat on the ocean floor for 5 days, waiting for the Navy to quit searching. Now, chapter 2 of that story is very important to me personally. The Brookings JCs invited the pilot of that plane, Nobu Fujiaki, to come to Brookings for the Azalea Festival. It was 20 years after the war. There was still tremendous anti-Japanese sentiment. Matter of fact, there's even a full-page ad in our local newspaper telling him not to come. Now, came anyway. He brought with him his wife and son and their 400-year-old ancestral samurai sword that had been passed from father to son for I don't know how many generations. By Japanese tradition, he could only give that sword to his son. So at a banquet in his honor, they presented the sword to the son, and the son gave it to the city of Brookings in atonement for dropping the bombs and as a symbol of international friendship. I was 8 years old at the time. I have a Japanese aunt who was asked to be an interpreter, so I was there for the whole thing. At 8 years old, big deal. Now looking back, I was witness to an amazing piece of history. Now, coming back to the lighthouse. The lighthouse service was very definitely a paramilitary style. It wasn't the Navy, it wasn't the Coast Guard, but they still had to follow a lot of the same rules. Not only did the lighthouse have to be perfectly clean and all the brass polished, but the entire station had to be shipshape. They inspected not only the lighthouse, but the keeper's quarters. They inspected the farms, and if it wasn't up to snuff, they could get fired. Matter of fact, up at Cape Disappointment, there was one case where a child's bedroom was a mess. That was the only thing that was wrong on the whole thing. He got fired because of it. And they had to wear the uniform. Here in the middle of the night, clear away from everything, anytime they were on duty at the lighthouse, they had to wear the full uniform. Now, this is heavy, heavy wool. If it got soiled, gee, it was the keeper's wife that had to wash it. You just didn't take it down to the 1-hour Martinizers. And those brass buttons had to be protected and polished. The uniform had to be protected from the cleaning chemicals, as well as the lens had to be protected from the light, or from the brass. Any questions there? All right, with that, I'll send you over to the lighthouse. We'll let them know you're on the way.